Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. This is a journal club sponsored by the ACR RFS about diversity in radiology workforce. We'll cover some of the barriers for recruitment, retention, and advancement of women and minorities. My name is Radiology. I'm a radiology resident at the University of Utah, and I'm a member of the ACR RFS Women and Diversity Advisory Group. I'm joined here by Dr. Jade Anderson. She will be co-moderating the session with me.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jade. I'm a PGY6 R4 at Norwalk Hospital. I'm the current sectional alternate delegate for the AMA resident and fellow section. I'm currently serving as the resident and fellow section secretary and treasurer for the Radiological Society of Connecticut. So welcome this evening. Thank you guys for joining us. Next slide. So this webinar is actually brought to you by the ACR Resident and Fellow Section Women and Diversity Advisory Group. And for our agenda this evening, we will be doing a 15-minute presentation followed by a 45-minute question and answer session. And I do have to give you the disclaimer that this is being recorded. So we have a star panel this evening. So I would first like to introduce Dr. Carolyn D. Benedictus. Dr. D. Benedictus is an associate professor of radiology and women's imaging and radiology residency program director at the University of Massachusetts. She was responsible for developing the first training program in the country to teach and evaluate radiology residents' communication skills through simulation. Dr. D. Benedictus is co-chair of the APDR Diversity Committee and contributed to the creation of the APDR Diversity and Inclusion Curriculum for residents. She has published numerous papers and led numerous initiatives to increase the number of women and underrepresented minorities in the field of radiology. Most recently, Dr. D. Benedictus was awarded the Jerome Arndt Grant to create a healthcare disparities curriculum for radiology residents. Next, I would like to introduce Dr. Lucy Spalluto. Dr. Spalluto earned her medical degree from the University of Virginia School of Medicine. She completed a residency in diagnostic radiology at Brown University and a fellowship in women's imaging at Vanderbilt University Medical Center. She completed the VA Quality Scholars Program and the Vanderbilt Master of Public Health Program in 2019. Dr. Spalluto leads an active research program focused on health equity and diversity and inclusion. Currently, she is the Vice Chair of Health Equity, Director of Women in Radiology, and Associate Director of the Office of Diversity and Inclusion for Vanderbilt's Department of Radiology. In addition, Dr. Spalluto is the immediate past president of the American Association for Women in Radiology. Finally, I would like to introduce Dr. Sherry Wang. Dr. Wang is an assistant professor of radiology and abdominal imaging at University of Utah. She completed her radiology residency in Australia and subsequently completed a fellowship in body imaging at the University of Washington, Seattle. She is passionate about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. Dr. Wang enjoys spending time with her toddler and husband in her spare time. Her current inspiration is from the quote, "The future doesn't belong to the faint-hearted. It belongs to the brave." Ronald Reagan. Thank you all for joining us this evening.
All right, thank you, Jade. I will provide a little bit summary before we start in our panel discussion. So today webinars, as we highlighted, it's about diversity in radiology workforce. I'll cover a few things, mainly 4 questions. What is diversity and inclusions, and what's our current status of diversity in radiology and why this is important, and what are some of the challenges and obstacles. There's several definitions in the literatures about what's diversity. I like that definition in particular. It's the range of human differences that include gender, race, ethnicity, physical ability, and national origin. So basically, I define it as differences in the background characteristics. How about inclusion? So inclusions is basically involvement or empowerment of all the peoples and respect their values, their talents, and what they bring to the table, as well as their background. So I feel like it's basically meaning welcoming workplace where your idea, your talents, and your contribution is valued. So what our current status of diversity in radiology? So I would rather say who's underrepresented or who's not included in radiology to their just to the proportion that they present in the population. So so the data say that there's underrepresentation of women and underrepresentation of underrepresented minority in medicine in radiology as well. And I will talk about each of those shortly. So women, they represent approximately 51% of the US population according to the census. The percentage of women in US medical school have been increasing. And I think according to 2019 data from the AMA, it's approximately 51% as of 2019. How about radiology? So the percentage from radiology is approximately around 27%, depending on the data source. But some places put it at 25, some places put it at 28, but it's been at 27. And that has been the case for several years, despite the increased number of female medical students throughout the years. The percentage of people joining radiology is still low. So according to the data from the AMA, diagnostic radiology as well as IR is among the 5 or the 6 male-dominated specialties, and that's the percentages of that they list in there based on 2019 data. So diagnostic radiology is around 73% and IR is around 81% as specialties. How much this have changed? This papers, so I'm putting kind of QR code for anyone who's interested in pulling the articles. They could scan that code and pull the article. So this paper is by Chapman in the radiology from 2014, and it's listed some of the data from 2010. And basically, the percentage of female practicing at that time was 24%. So it's haven't changed that much since then. How about underrepresented minority? Basically, that's kind of like similar stories. The definition of underrepresented minority is basically African American, Hispanics, American Indian, and Alaska Natives. The data from the same paper. So basically, we see that they, for example, they represent the Hispanic represents 16%, but they in their population, but in radiology they represent approximately 4%. African American represent approximately 13% at the time of the study. So this 2010 data, but they represent only 22% from their faculty, and from the resident they only 3%. So why it is important that we kind of like should work on for diversity and inclusion. There is several data within medicine and outside medicine that associate diversity with more customer satisfaction if it's outside medicine and business, but in medicine, it's more associated with patient satisfaction. It's associated more with innovations and with better financial performance in general. There's plenty of data out there. I will not go in details of these, but happy to share articles with people later. The last kind of like questions that I want to list here is like, what are the biggest challenges and obstacles to increase diversity and improve inclusion in radiology? One of the main factors is medical students' engagement and their interest in radiology. As we saw, like the numbers of people, females and minorities applying to radiology is still low as their percentage of population. So for example, in this curve from the same articles, at 2010, the applicant were 28%. So they still much lower than the medical school graduate, which was 48%. It's decreases slightly at each level, but the biggest jump or the biggest difference was at this stage between the medical students and the applicant. And then how much this have changed. So the percentage has not changed much. So in 2013, women applicant to radiology was approximately 30%. In 2017, it's 29% and has been fluctuating around that numbers for the most part. I looked at for recent data from like 2021 eras, and that percentage was basically 28%. So it's haven't changed. It's been fluctuating up and down throughout the years for a while now. What some of the other challenges? So there, several of the published papers list kind of like elements of unconscious bias in recruitment of the residents, in recruitment of the faculties. They are minorities, they are females. I'll list two examples just to keep it short. So one example is the way the recommended letters written for women and underrepresented minorities. This is one of the papers that in Journal of General Internal Medicine. And basically when it's come to underrepresented minority or women, they use kind of like more personal attitudes like pleasant or lovely, while when they describe non-underrepresented minority or male, they go more toward the competency level, so knowledgeable, scientific, and etc. Other example, there was a paper in radiology, kind of like more simulations. And they found that if you hide the pictures from applicant, they were rated higher if they are obese or facially unattractive. I found this study was very interesting to me. It was by Maxfield and was published in Academic Medicine in 2019. So that's basically how much they rank or they rate the applications without seeing the picture. So these are two examples. What's some of the other factors that might represent a challenge or obstacles? Data show that women advance at a slower rate in academia, and they more likely to work paradigms or non-partnerships track in private. And that's kind of like contribute to some of the disparities. This an articles in Radiology from 2017 list kind of like numbers about the advancement. So if we look only at the people who graduated residency in 1980, we noticed that for male, there's over 50% that they already became full professors, while if you look at females faculty, there was only 22% of them reach the full professors. This data is like many years after they finished residency. So those are graduate of 1980. And then, but the trend holds still even with the other years. So some of the other challenges, women are more likely to suffer burnout. They face similarly for the minorities, there's issues with microaggressions, there's issues with imposter syndromes. All of these factors contribute kind of like to the disparities. A paper by Higgins was published in JACR in last year about burnouts. Basically the black bars is female, so the white bar is male. So there's more significant burnout, and that's contribute also to less professional fulfillment, and it does contribute a lot to kind of like the disparities that we're talking about. So of course, for anyone interested, they could scan the code and review that papers in details. But other contributing factors, including kind of like what I call it family-related stuff and work environment-related stuff, and stuff related to parental leave, stuff related to family responsibility, childcare. These all contribute to kind of like the disparities that we see in radiology. And that's all I have. I think we could proceed with the panel discussion. Jay, do you want to take it from here?
Yes, I think we can stop sharing the screen for now. So we have a few questions, and I think I will direct them to the actual speaker. So I think I'm going to start with Dr. Spalluto. So the first question I'm going to ask is, how do you address the negative consequences of working a part-time job? I know women are more likely to take a part-time position in the workplace.
So the question, Ms. Brenner, how do you address the negative consequences of working part-time? And first of all, I don't think there are any negative consequences of working part-time. I think it's a great thing, and I think it works for a lot of people. So I think it might be more of how do you address the negative sort of bias or the negative connotations that may come with working part-time. And especially more so in the academic setting, I think, although it definitely presents in the academic and private practice setting. And I think it's become more accepted over time, but there definitely is still some perceived bias with it. I think, like, how committed are you to the institution if you aren't working full-time? How committed are you to advancing your academic career if you aren't working part-time? But it's interesting that a lot of research has shown that if you give people a little bit of flexibility and you give them the opportunity to sort of create the work-life balance, work-life harmony, whatever term it is that you choose to use, that they're actually more committed to the workplace and they're actually more productive. And a lot of people, they may want to be part-time forever. They may want to be part-time when their children are younger and spend more time with them, or there's something else going on with their life that they need a little bit more time for. And giving them, providing the opportunity for them to have that flexibility when they need it, makes people more likely to stay with the institution in the long term and to be even more committed when they come back. So I think there's data that shows that. And so I've always sort of been told that, presenting data to people can be very persuasive. So sharing that with institutions, sharing examples that work, whether it's partial load work, shared schedules, different types of flex schedules where maybe you work in the morning or maybe you work at night, and showing successful examples can really sort of set the tone and provide examples to other institutions to try that. And I think the more institutions that allow this type of work, the more acceptable it will become, the more mainstream it will become. And like I said, I think it's a wonderful opportunity for, not only women, not only younger people, not only older, but anyone may need to have this flexible type of schedule at a different time in their life for different reasons.
Excellent, thank you. And for the audience, just a quick reminder, if you do have questions, please post them in the Q&A.
I would like to shift a little bit gears and ask Carolyn, because you work with female medical students and minorities to increase their engagement. So I want to see what kind of some of the misconceptions and stereotypes that you noticed while you trying to increase their interest in radiology.
Absolutely. So with women, specifically, we hold a Women in Radiology panel every year where only female residents, female attendings, and female fellows speak to all residents. I mean, all medical students. Any medical student can attend, male or female or other. And usually they are so surprised to hear that we see patients. I think that's a really big surprise for them, that they didn't picture that. And that was kind of a deal breaker for them with radiology, thinking that there'd be no patient contact. There's been lots of research studies shown that women specifically really want to feel like they're in a caregiving specialty a lot of times, and radiology just doesn't check that box for them all the time. So that's always been one thing. The other barrier for both underrepresented minorities and for women is they're not seeing good role models that they feel they can relate to. So the woman that got me started in this path of research was a female medical student who had said she was going to go into radiology, and then someone told me, oh yeah, she's not going into it. And I said, well, why isn't she going into it? Oh, I'm not really sure. So I talked to her and she's like, well, you're the only young woman I knew. Everyone else was an old white guy. And I kind of felt like if I went into radiology, I wouldn't have anything in common with anyone. And yeah, the work's interesting, but to go to work where you just don't fit in seems uncomfortable. And the same goes for underrepresented students. I mean, you look at a department and there's no one who's Black, or there's no one who's Latino, and you just feel like you don't fit or you don't have a good role model. So one thing I've really tried to do is pair people up with really good role models and a lot of mentoring, tons and tons of mentoring. So for the women, I just make myself very visible. I make sure as many female radiologists as I can are visible. We actually have a whole rotation called Women in Radiology. It's a week-long rotation for anyone, male, female, other, who want to rotate on a week in radiology and see what it's like to have women, for a woman in radiology. And so they rotate through mostly non-female dominated specialties. So they don't come through breast. They come through MSK, neuro-IR, neuroradiology, chest radiology, things where it's mostly men, to talk to the women about, why do you love your job? What's good about it? But also, what's it like to be the only woman in MSK? We only have one female MSK imager. We only have one female interventionalist between neuro and IR. And it really helps them. Same with underrepresented students. What I do is I really try to pair them up with mentors, even if I don't have them at my institution. I am part of the NMA. And so I'll reach out wider to some people I've met through that to get some role models and mentors for my medical students. There are pipeline programs or programs like Peer. I'll get them involved in Peer. At UMass, we have a bunch of different programs that are actually geared towards supporting underrepresented underrepresented medicine students to see different aspects. I also am happily to employ any residents I have with similar backgrounds that can also mentor them. So I know that's really helped a lot. I always say you can't be what you can't see. And I actually had a medical student tell me that when she came to radiology and saw that we had a Black female chief resident, she was just like, I can do this. And she ended up going into it. She's like, that was just eye-opening to me. Again, she had only seen white men. And to see she's like, was freaking incredible too. She was like the world's biggest superstar. And she was just like, oh my gosh, she's like, it was just changed for me. I could see myself in the role. So I really think if you do things like that, also exposing all medical students early, first year, get your medical school to start exposing them to radiology in the first year, have third year electives. That helps with exposure for all students, irregardless. But it particularly, I think, helps in students not considering it already who tend to be women or underrepresented in medicine.
That's actually really excellent to hear. I think, I was initially an ortho resident, but as I was applying, I'm going to be an MSK fellow at University of Wisconsin next year. And I specifically asked, I specifically looked to see how many women were in the department, in the MSK department, and then how many minorities were in the department as well. So that was actually really important to me. So that's awesome that you're doing that at UMass. Dr. Wang, so some women are sometimes known to discriminate against and penalize other women who are successful or, trying to be successful. Could you talk about the importance of hashtag she for she in addition to hashtag he for she?
I think this is like a very important point because we are not immune to unconscious bias just because of our own identities. And we are allies, not because of our identity, but because of our actions. And I think that's really important to put out there. And I think one of the biggest issues in regards to this is best illustrated from the study that showed two exactly same CVs, one with a male name and one with a female name. And that study found that both males and females actually were equally guilty of committing gender bias, and women can be sexist too. And in this particular study, the scientists actually judged the female applicants harsher than they were judging the males. And they used words like, oh, I don't think she's a good candidate because she is incompetent. And I feel like this is a really big issue because, if we know someone is being unjust in their unconscious bias towards us, we can dismiss that comment, right? But if it's sugar-coated in a way that goes, well, I think you're just incompetent, then women do take that to heart and go, well, I'm just incompetent. And I think that links back with the whole imposter syndrome and the whole imposter phenomenon, because we're kind of getting gaslighted to feel like we are less than when we are actually very good at what we do. So we need to be aware of our own unconscious bias, regardless of who we are and our identity. The other thing I wanted to bring up is something called the Queen Bee syndrome. And it's actually used to describe successful women in a male-dominant working setting who assume negative attitudes towards other women, and they also distance themselves from other women, and they want to be the only queen bee in the organization, and this is how the term came about. And in this particular study, looking at this phenomenon, it did find that women in high positions were more critical of the leadership skills, career commitment, and assertiveness of their male colleagues rather than their male colleagues. And that ties in with Dr. Spalluto's question about part-time. There's nothing wrong with being part-time. It's what people link as a connotation to what part-time means and your commitment to your job. In this particular group of women, they also describe themselves with masculine attributes. It's kind of like that wanting to fit in into the boys' club. You know, you got to dress like them, you got to talk like them. And why does this happen? This actually happens because of sexism in the workplace, because women feel like there's a quota, and if someone else comes in, it's a threat to them. But in actual fact, I would like everyone to think of, like, change their mindset. It's not you're replacing or someone is replacing you at the table. Why don't we build a bigger table with more chairs and everyone can fit in and contribute to the radiology community?
That's excellent. Thank you.
Some related questions that's coming from the audience. This open to any of our panelists if they would like to answer that. Any advice for like supporting residents or faculty who might be the only like from their genders, their minorities, their backgrounds in their residency or their sections? Like, what are some of the advices that you have for to increase support of those minorities, residents or faculty in their sections, or fellows or students? I feel like there is a lot of buy-in from like higher up, from leaderships in academic departments, but like, what are some of the strategies that we could do as co-workers and in those sections?
Well, I don't know, you know, I hate that it falls on the student or the resident, right? It should be falling on those of us who are more senior. I know personally, I make a really, even if I don't have somebody who could mentor them, who is exactly what they're looking for, I try to find somebody to mentor them. And then I try to find outside, like we've had speakers come from a certain, like, for example, I had a speaker who was from Puerto Rico and I had a resident from Puerto Rico and he wanted to go back and he had all, and so I, at the end of the, right when I saw the speaker, I said, hey, do you have time afterwards? Could I have you Zoom with like one of my residents? I think he could really use a great role model like you, blah, blah, blah. You know, try to connect, even if you have to reach outside your institution, really try to connect people with the type of mentors they need. And then you can be a sponsor too. Make sure you're telling them, hey, you should go for this, push them a little, make sure everybody's getting pushed a little to do a little something, put their name out there for saying all your residents, all the students that you interact with, really try to help them. And I hate that it falls on the student, but if it does fall on the student and you're not at a very proactive institution, look for mentors, really reach out. Don't be afraid to email the program director or the director of medical student education for radiology and kind of say, hey, I'm kind of interested in radiology. I'm looking for some opportunities, and hopefully they'll be really receptive. Or if you work with an attending one day on a radiology rotation, say, you know, I think I might want to go into this. Do you know anyone who could help me?
No, I completely agree, Carolyn. And it is hard when the onus sometimes falls to the student or the individual themselves. And sometimes it will be students who are interested in radiology who are at an institution that doesn't even have radiology. And that becomes even more challenging for them to start to build connections and find mentors and sponsors. But I have found that radiology in general is a pretty friendly field. And while it can be scary, and again, the onus shouldn't fall to the student to reach out, don't hesitate to reach out. The worst that happens is someone will ignore you. But most of the time, I find that people respond. I've had students from institutions all over the country, you know, they've seen me talk somewhere, or they've found my email somewhere, and they reach out, and I'm more than happy to talk to anyone about radiology and why I chose radiology and what my day-to-day life is like, and try to make connections for them with people at other institutions. Other opportunities are, join groups like this one through the ACR, meet other students, ask them how they've gotten involved, join the AAWR, the American Association for Women in Radiology. These groups and national organizations are great ways to build peer mentoring networks and to find more senior mentors and sponsors, and to find out about programs like the peer program Carolyn was talking about, or other opportunities for students to get involved, get scholarships, get opportunities to shadow at other institutions. So there are lots of opportunities right now. I feel like radiology has finally, as the big radiology has finally really begun to embrace diversity and inclusion and provide resources to try to engage more women and underrepresented minorities to pursue radiology.
I completely agree. It should not be on the onus of the trainee, because I feel that really contributes to the minority tax, where we feel very burnt out, and it's very, very difficult to be your authentic self. And I know there's a huge push for everyone to be their authentic self, to really show who they are. But the problem is you really can't do that in an area or in a space that there's no psychological safety. So reaching out to people, I think there's like two thoughts. One, what we can do ourselves, we can reach out to people who are different from us, and breaking boundaries and breaking unconscious bias starts with us, right? And the other thing is for the trainee or the student to reach out to someone that they feel like they can have a connection with. And you can have a connection with people for a myriad of reasons. It doesn't have to be really about gender or race. It could be you have a common interest in something. And I think that broadens up the pool. So we're not kind of in an echo chamber and in silos. We're reaching out to others. And for me, because I trained in Australia, I don't have many connections in the US. And being an IMG, it's incredibly isolating sometimes. And what I actually found the most useful was Twitter. I found so many people on Twitter who were my mentors, sponsors, and people who would really just advocate for you. So I think that's a very nice place to start looking for your tribe.
Thank you all for your answers. It's excellent. I do want to ask Dr. Spalluto. So in a lot of circumstances, the diversity and inclusion missions are usually implemented from leaders who are passionate about it, like yourselves. So how do we actually engage other staff and faculty to ensure that new hires, including residents, are treated fairly, new faculty are treated fairly, that they get enough mentorship, academic time, and don't face these microaggressions in the workplace or experience imposter syndrome?
And I think that your question kind of speaks to what the word inclusion means in the term diversity and inclusion. So diversity, is the representation. And a lot of times institutions unfortunately look at diversity as a checkbox. They're like, we have 5 women this year, we have 2 underrepresented minorities, we're diverse, yay. But really it's the inclusion piece that's more important. And what's hard about inclusion is that it's really an active process. This is, changing your institution systemically to provide opportunities where everyone can thrive and succeed. And that's not just a button you can push one day. It could be a lot easier if you could, but it's changing the culture of your institution to want to be more diverse and to want to embrace diverse opinions and to recognize the value of diversity and to provide opportunities for those who think differently to succeed and be recognized and have their voices heard and feel like they're really an important part of the institution. And so it's that working towards inclusion that can actually make you more diverse and help you to recruit a more diverse residency and a more diverse faculty, because individuals will start to see your institution as a place that they want to be a part of, that would, accept and embrace them. And so it's this idea of cultural change towards inclusion. I think that takes time, and there's a lot of pieces to it. And yes, it takes leadership buy-in for sure, but it also takes buy-in from eventually everyone in the institution. And I think as as sort of time has passed and more institutions are having diversity and inclusion committees or diversity and inclusion, whatever they call their entity that promotes diversity and inclusion, and that as those institutions have changed and grown and become more successful, others see that, and then it becomes something to strive for. So yeah, so it's definitely the leadership buy-in, but it's important at all levels, and it's important to have an institution that provides resources to make all of it possible.
Thank you.
I want to shift a little bit gear back to like recruitment of residents. And I want to ask Dr. Benedict about one of your papers from back in the 2019 for, let's say that there was like high percentage of the female applicants entering a program within higher NIH ranking criteria. And I think Dr. Spalluto was also co-authors on that papers. I kind of like was reading the discussion and thinking about like what's kind of will be potential causes. Is that kind of like related to particularly to that institutions? They have more resources for diversity, more visibility of their minority faculties, more visibility of their female faculties, more representation in national meeting, or it's related more that those minority students, female students, they basically have higher scores, higher academic achievement, and they target these high research profile institutions. There's kind of like one of the questions we received from the audience is somewhat related to that, is that she heard like from predominantly white programs, and they have like, they try to recruit more diverse audience, but they struggle in that despite they put them higher on their rank list, but they didn't come there for a reason or not. So I don't know if you or any of the other panelists would like to comment on that.
Sure. So actually that paper came out of frustration on my part, being a mid-tier program who used to have no trouble getting diverse residents. And then all of a sudden, when I think it's great, everyone started talking about diversity, inclusion in radiology, everybody started talking about it. And all of a sudden I lost all my women and all my underrepresented minorities. And when I looked, they were ranking at, I guess, statistically ranked higher programs. And that's what piqued my interest. They said, wait a minute, these people were just as qualified 3 years ago. Why weren't they matching there? And I think, you know, on paper, first of all, there's a lot of data that shows for women specifically that their applications tend to be more qualified than men, better put together, grades higher, sometimes even test scores higher. So these women were always qualified. I think these women were always qualified. I think a lot of the biases that existed before might have prevented them from being ranked as highly. And then when everybody had this big wake up moment of, oh my gosh, having underrepresented minorities and women in our specialty actually benefits our specialty and is better for our patients and is better for our specialty as a whole, people started rethinking the way I think they did resident selection. And there was a big push because you would see programs that last year matched all men, all of a sudden started matching over half women, and they were taking all the people I ranked highly. So I think it's also a resource thing though. You are correct. These higher ranked institutions have more money, have more active diversity and inclusion committees, have vice chairs for diversity and inclusion, and they have the resources, the administrative staff, everything to put more effort into the recruitment than some of these institutions that don't have things like that. So I definitely think that, it's great. These people belong in these great positions, and they probably weren't being put in them for, reasons of being, just overlooked because it was just people used to go by the fit and wanting people who were just like everyone else in their program. And now people are opening their eyes saying, wait, this probably isn't the best way to be. We probably do want people with different opinions. And then they put all that power that they have, these recruitment tools, this staff and everything, to recruiting people, and it was very successful for them. And I think it's very good for radiology as a whole. So I think that's one of the major things, is that you have to put the effort in to recruit and really show people that they're valued, that they're going to be included, that, like Dr. Spalluto said, that they're not just going to come and be in checkbox, but they're going to be valued, because to bring somebody who's underrepresented in radiology into radiology and that not leveraging what they have to offer by including them is just completely pointless. You're not going to benefit from the diversity of experiences. So I think that, I think a lot of it has to do with making the effort and being intentional.
And recruitment efforts I mean, it takes a lot of resources to overhaul your recruitment efforts, whether it's changing what your recruitment committee looks like, making sure you have a more diverse recruitment committee, to changing the way you review applications. We changed to more of a holistic review, where instead of saying, everyone has to have a board score of X, and if they don't have that, we're not even going to look at them, to, we went from years ago looking at more numbers oriented to now looking at the application as a whole to say, what is this person, what can they bring to our residency program that is different than something anyone else has ever brought before, so we want to have applicants from geographically diverse locations and different types of undergrad or medical school experiences, some MD PhDs, some, people who had more arts and sort of liberal arts backgrounds, who have just different ways of thinking, because having individuals who think differently can change the way, where you design your education processes, the way you're designing logistical aspects of the department, the way you're interacting with your patients. And we've really seen the benefit of that to our department. But it takes, like Carolyn was saying, it takes resources to do those things. And some institutions have more of those resources than others.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's going back to the point of like diversity and inclusion. So it's not necessarily only diversity, but they should be included in the discussion. I want to ask kind of like a related question, given that unfortunately we're still living in the COVID pandemics and everything is virtual, and like how would like try to avoid some of these like implicit biases and systematic biases with everything is now even more challenging with like virtual interviews. There's more applications each residency program is receiving, and still like the selection committee still try to be fair as they review it. They try to be holistic, but it's just the efforts is there's much burdens, I feel like, on the programs. I don't know if you have anything, any of our panelists want to kind of comment on that, and any advice or kind of like things that they found useful.
So first of all, as a program director, I'll tell you, I think it's leveled the playing field in some ways, but it's also made it harder. So programs without resources, if you don't have enough people to review your applications, you resort to sort filters. And so those of you who don't know what filters is, you can filter applications certain ways. And the worst way you could ever filter applications are by a step one score, right? That's the feared thing. That's the thing that is going to hurt diversity in our programs, to filter by that. But if you have 800 applications and you have 2 reviewers, it's so tempting to do that, right? So what we did, for example, and we're a smaller program, we got more reviewers. Not only did we get more reviewers, we had reviewers with expertise in certain areas review things. So I had DOs review all the DO applications so that they could know what, there are things of being an allopathic doctor you don't understand that is impressive maybe. And so I had them do it. I had someone who went to Caribbean medical schools review a Caribbean medical school. I do all the IMGs with the help of some of the IMG residents who I ask questions to of like, is this really good? Is this really good? So I really think you have to do that. You have to do the resources. I think it's leveled the playing field, especially for those people with financial difficulties, because you don't have to travel anymore. And I really do think in some ways that has helped, because you can interview at more places and get yourself out there. Next year, we are most likely going to participate in signaling in radiology. And I think once we do that, which will mean that you can't hoard interviews, right? You get, I forget how, I don't fully understand how it fully works, but essentially you can't hoard interviews. Programs will know if you have too many interviews and that you can't accept their interviews. So I think that is going to really help. And a lot of people have really said that it levels the playing field actually not traveling there, that the decreasing the burden of the expense, it's a life inconvenience. Everyone has different life circumstances. Some people have children, some people have people they care for, all sorts of circumstances. So I think it's good and it's bad in that way for diversity. But there are people that can now interview in places they might not have because traveling would have been too far. So I think it's a plus minus. I think the signaling is going to help.
Thank you. I did want to circle back to Dr. Wang because I wanted to definitely ask this question. So are confidence gaps, imposter syndrome, and guilt preventing women from reaching their potential? And then how do we actually encourage women to raise their hand?
So I think this is a really difficult thing. I experienced it myself. I'll give you an example. When I was looking for jobs as an attending, I would look at the requirements, blah, blah, blah. And I'll be like, well, I'm an IMG. I don't know if I'll do this, do that, blah, blah, blah. So I would talk myself out of applying. And my husband, being a male, he just said, just apply. The worst thing you can do is say no. And I was like, okay. He's just like, just go and do it. So that was a big wake up call for me to start raising my hand and start doing things that I have an interest in, but I feel like I'm not qualified for. And a lot of times when we feel like we're not qualified for something, we actually are. And that's called the confidence gap. So that for me was to acknowledge my own feelings of inadequacy, even though I clearly can make the mark. And then that's also a part of unconscious bias, but towards ourselves. So we talk about, people having unconscious bias towards us, but really we are the ones who are stopping ourselves from getting out there and doing things. So that was one of the biggest things. And the other biggest hurdle that I had to overcome was this idea of self-promotion. I feel like self-promotion is such a dirty word, especially for women. It's like you're going there and you're advocating for yourself. It can be taken very well, like this girl, she's a go-getter. She can go and she knows what she wants and she's willing to put herself out there. But some people may see that as, oh, she's a bit, aggressive. So the terms that I used to label us becomes very different. When a male does it, it's like, oh, very ambitious, very leadership-like. When a woman does it, especially for me, I think I'm also an Asian female. So most people think, we're very quiet, we're very docile, we listen and we don't speak much. So to go against the grain sometimes really takes people aback. But that I can't control how people view that action, but I need to be able to go, what I'm doing is fine and I need to continue to do it. So those are the two biggest things for myself. The other thing about raising your hand, now that I'm a faculty member, I feel like if I have opportunities for other people, I should also help pull them up. And this is why the idea of succession is really useful. Say, for example, you have a term at some sort of committee, rank and rate, RSNA, whatever, and it's about to end. You should start planning your succession and say, hey, that resident's really good. It will be the time when they're about to step into being a faculty member. So that's what we can do to help others raise their hands. And actually, Dr. Harlan said a really good thing. She said that we should push people. We should push people to be out of their comfort zone. And that is us as more senior, recognizing the confidence gap that a junior person may feel. And that is part of helping each other raise our hands. And the last thing is about mentorship and sponsorship. I think both are very, very important, but it's very dependent on your where you are at the moment. Sponsorship, I think, doesn't apply to residents as much as, say, for junior faculty. Especially in the academic setting, for junior faculty, you have you need to be promoted. There are things you have to do. There are things you have to tick the box. And really, you need someone to give you that pull through the door. And for me, I have personally felt as a junior faculty, sponsorship has been amazing and it has made the world of difference to my career trajectory. And mentorship has been amazing to help me navigate all these nuances in academic life. There's actually a lot to learn. It's not just what we see. So both of those coupled together has helped me become a better radiologist and helped me learn to raise my hand.
And actually, I wanted to say, piggyback on something she said. I actually was talking to a group of attendings and I challenged these female attendings to go through their CV and see what they don't need to do anymore. And that there can tend to be a lot of hoarding of positions when you're a woman because you're afraid to let them go because you work so hard to get them, let them go. What have you outgrown? Do you need to be on some committee when you're the chair of two others? No, let it go. And again, like Sherry said, don't just say, I don't want to do it anymore. Tell them who you want to fill your spot. So definitely, I think all women, as you move up every so many years, should really look through your CV and see what you can give up and give it to other women.
Dr. Spalluto, I have a questions about, I was reading your papers about the liftoff programs, and you developed that kind of like programs where there's several modules to help promotions of female faculties. And I was reading that only 51% feel they have equal promotion opportunity. So I guess my first part of this question is like, did this have changed since then? I feel like the papers has been few years back. I don't know if this have how much this has changed since then, if there's any data. And I guess the other questions is going back to the kind of like the succession and the CV development and the positions, because I feel like some of the programs was covering that elements as well. So I don't know if you want to add a little bit about that as well.
Sure. So what we call our liftoff programs, so it's a leadership intervention to further the training of female faculty. And this is really what kind of jump-started our Women in Radiology program at Vanderbilt. I guess it was a long time ago now. It doesn't seem like it should be that long ago. It was back in 2014 when we really got things started. And like Carolyn was saying, the idea for her paper was born out of sort of a personal frustration she was having. The idea for this program was born out of a personal frustration that I was having. When I had been in private practice for a couple of years, I came back to academics and I was kind of committed to academics, wanted to understand what the pathway to promotion was, wanted to understand how I could contribute to the department. And there was a lot of lack of transparency at that time. And I thought, if I'm someone who's really committed and willing to put in the energy to do this, and I'm finding it challenging, the people who aren't willing to put as much time and energy into this are never going to get promoted because it's so frustrating to try to navigate the academic pathway. And so I started working with Stephanie Spotswood, one of my original mentors in this area, who has since retired, but I still bother her all the time. So she's stayed my mentor, even though she's retired. So we kind of worked together to design a program, and we started by just doing a needs assessment of the women in our department, saying, what are your perceptions of some things related to gender equity? Do you think women and men are promoted at the same rate, paid at the same rate? Do you think you have appropriate access to mentoring opportunities, different things like that? What would be helpful? What resources could we provide? And what we found was that I think like 90% of the women in our department felt that career advancement was important to them. But 90% also thought that men were promoted at a greater rate than women were. And I was like, well, that's like a pretty crazy disparity. Like they want to get promoted, but they're all frustrated because they feel like the men are getting promoted more readily than they are. And so we built this program with goals of really increasing transparency for promotional guidelines, helping people to make a better CV, a better educational portfolio, providing access to mentorship. And we've done, we did a 1-year outcomes measure, which is Riggy, but you were mentioning when we started to notice small incremental increases in women's satisfaction with pace of career advancement. And then we also have recently looked at our 5-year outcomes, which is embargoed. And I wish I could share all the details with you, but it's coming out in JACR soon. It was written by a colleague of mine, Courtney Tomlinson, and it's great work. It shows that, over 5 years, really dedicated efforts to increase transparency and increase opportunities for women in the department have really improved women's perceptions of equity in the department.
That's great. I will look forward to read the paper.
I will ask, I think we have time for one more question from the audience. So it says, what questions would you advise people to ask when evaluating the diversity of an institution to join? Specifically, how to ask about the culture of inclusion, leadership and otherwise, and systemic structures providing psychological safety. And this is open to everyone.
I think that's a great question. I think, Dr. DeBenedictis was talking about some of the good things and bad things about interviewing remotely. And I think this might be one of the drawbacks. I think when you go to a place in person, you really can get a better feel for what the culture of the place might be. I think we're doing better with it virtually now, but a lot, you can tell a lot just by talking to people, looking around, you know, what does the faculty look like? What does the staff look like? Do people really seem to be happy with their jobs? And then I think you can ask the tough questions. You can say, you know, what sorts of resources has your institution put in place to support diversity and inclusion efforts? You know, do you have a leadership? Do you have a committee? Is there opportunity to get involved? If you're interested in getting involved, are there, you know, is there actual money that supports these efforts? And that you can ask this question specifically about the department you're looking to join, and then about the bigger medical center itself, because I think both of those are important and can play slightly different roles in the resources that are available and the overall culture of a department.
Look at who interviews you. Is it a diverse group of people? Is it all the same people? Really look at that. Who interviewed me? Did I see all men? Did I see all people who aren't diverse? You really, really want to look at that, because it should be representative of the people in the institution. So even just like, I remember looking at the, you know, for those of you that are applying or applied recently, you might have remembered all those open houses, and they'd have the pictures of all the faculty who were gonna be on the open house. Just that alone said a lot, let me tell you. So look at stuff like that. That gives you a decent clue, because it might not be perfect. It might not be someone represented from every single background, but make sure it's not all one, you know, make sure it looks like there is different people interviewing, that it's not all the same person multiplied.
And I joke, you know, when we walk down like our main hallway in the radiology room, you have the composites on the wall. And, you know, 20 years ago, like it was like the same group of men every year over and over and over again. And then slowly you've seen like the face of the department change. So I completely just, you know, eyes and ears open all the time. Listening for comments about, you know, people's experiences, what they think of the department, how they feel in the department. I think really just taking a good look.
Rahid, you're muted.
Okay, so I think we reach almost the top of the hour. So I would like to ask every one of you if you would like to, if you have any closing remarks or anything that suggest for us as residents to kind of like that we could do our parts to increase diversity and inclusion.
I'd just like to start by thanking the ACR for helping to put this together and for continuing to be so supportive of diversity and inclusion efforts and of trainees and offering opportunities for trainees. I would just like to say in closing, if anyone has any questions, you're always welcome to reach out, email, call me. I'm happy to answer your questions if I can, or try to connect you with someone appropriate. As Carolyn was mentioning earlier, we're always trying to make the right connections for someone to find someone that they have something in common with in radiology.
Well, I would like to thank everyone, give a special thanks to our panelists who volunteered to spend their time and expertise with us this evening. I would also like to thank the ACR RFS Women and Diversity Subcommittee, with particular recognition to Rahid for his hard work in putting this session together. Small clap for you. Thank you guys. If you have any further questions,
one member of
oh, yeah,
the
go ahead.
committee,
Go ahead.
It was a group report, so.
If you have any further questions, please feel free to reach out to the ACR RFS, and we will be sure to answer those. Otherwise, everyone have a great Monday evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.